"Before you toast this engagement," the gray-haired man said softly, "you should stand when you hear my daughter's name." Crystal glasses hovered mid-air. A laugh died in someone's throat, and Ethan Vale, smiling, triumphant, rehearsed for cameras, felt the room tilt as if the floor had remembered a different owner. Across the ballroom, under chandeliers that threw diamonds of light onto polished marble, Lila stood like a secret finally stepping into daylight. Ethan blinked once, not because she was beautiful, because she was unfamiliar. Not the quiet woman who used to fold his hoodies while he polished investor decks at 2 a.m. Not the patient wife who apologized for taking up space. This Lila walked as if the air made way for her. And in that half-second, when Ethan's throat tightened, when the music kept playing as if nothing was wrong, he did not understand that the most expensive thing in the room was not the ring in Chloe Sterling's hand. It was the truth about to be spoken out loud. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Ethan tried to answer with certainty and came up with something thin and brittle. "My ex." The gray-haired man's eyes didn't change. He only looked at Ethan like a banker looks at a signature. Then he turned to the room, to the investors, to the photographers, to the faces that could make a company soar or sink. And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hartwell Crown." The name landed like a gavel. Ethan didn't know why his stomach dropped at that particular word. Crown. As if he'd been wearing it for months and only now felt the weight. And right then, when he opened his mouth to laugh it off, to reclaim control, the elevator chime sounded. A clean, elegant ding. The kind you hear in buildings where no one ever raises their voice because power doesn't need to. Chloe's fingers tightened around his arm. "Ethan," she hissed through a smile. "Who is that man?" Ethan couldn't answer, because the story didn't start here. It never starts where the lights are brightest. To understand why Ethan Vale, golden boy of Veilbyte Technologies, would lose everything in the same room he rented to prove he'd won, we have to go back to the day he decided his wife was excess baggage. And the day a quiet billionaire sat in a conference room and watched a man mistake love for weakness. The first thing Ethan remembered about those early years was the sound of rain against a window that didn't quite seal. Not a storm, just a steady, persistent tapping, as if the city itself was checking in, asking, "Are you still in there?" Their apartment in Queens was small enough that if Lila opened the fridge, Ethan couldn't open the closet. The radiator hissed like it had opinions. The hallway light flickered whenever someone on the 5th floor used a hairdryer. But it was theirs. Ethan used to sit on the couch that sagged in the middle, laptop balanced on his knees, the glow painting his face in tired blue. Lila would sit at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she never finished. She'd watch him the way you watch someone building a bridge out of matchsticks, careful, fascinated, slightly afraid of the collapse. "You should sleep," she'd say. "In 10 minutes, Ethan would promise, meaning in 10 pitches, in 10 edits, in 10 more chances to be enough. He wasn't anyone back then, just a guy with a big idea and a small bank account. His app prototype lived on borrowed cloud credits and stubbornness. He wore the same hoodie so many times it took on the shape of his shoulders like a second skin. When he talked about the future, he talked fast, as if the words might disappear if he didn't catch them. He wasn't cruel then, he was hungry. And Lila was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. She never bragged, never posted about them, never networked like the other startup girlfriends Ethan saw at demo nights, laughing too loudly beside their men, pretending they understood term sheets. Lila listened. That was her superpower. She listened when Ethan explained product-market fit like it was religion. She listened when he feared he was a fraud. She listened when he confessed, late one night, "If I fail, I don't know who I am." Lila had put her hand over his, warm, steady. "Then you'll still be you," she said, "and I'll still be here." Ethan had kissed her knuckles like he was grateful for her existence. Back then, he thought love was a soft landing. He didn't realize love can also be a mirror, and mirrors, eventually, show you what you don't want to see. When Ethan's rent was due and his account hovered near zero, he didn't tell Lila. He just stared at his phone, recalculating the math, cutting meals into halves in his head. Lila noticed anyway. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll cover it this month." Ethan's pride flared. "No, you don't have to." "I want to," she said gently, like she was adjusting a blanket. She picked up extra shifts at a gallery. She sold 2 pieces of jewelry Ethan didn't even remember her owning. She lied with grace, saying, "It was from before we met," when the truth was that her closet held things from a life she never described. Sometimes envelopes appeared in their mailbox. Small refunds, rebates, a check from a class action settlement she'd forgotten she joined. Ethan would laugh, relieved. "Babe, you're lucky." Lila would smile and turn away before her eyes could give anything away. Because the truth sat behind her teeth like a secret that could ruin everything. Not ruin Ethan, she told herself, but ruin what they had. Ruin the possibility that someone loved her for her, not for the last name she never used. She didn't want to be Hartwell. She wanted to be Lila. So she became the invisible scaffolding beneath Ethan's dream. She paid the LLC filing fee under her name and never mentioned it again. She arranged, discreetly, a micro-loan from a friend. Money that came from her own trust but passed through layers until it looked like luck. She covered the legal consultation after Ethan received a scary cease and desist email from a competitor. She didn't do it to control him. She did it because she believed in him, and because she believed the best kind of love was the kind that didn't demand applause. There was only one person who knew the whole truth, and he wasn't in their apartment. He lived in Midtown, in a building that looked down at the city like it owned the skyline. Arthur Hartwell, her father. A man who carried power the way others carried weather, quietly, inevitably, and with the kind of patience that makes people nervous. He called sometimes, not often, always from a number Lila never saved. "Are you safe?" he would ask. "I'm fine," she would answer. "Are you happy?" Lila would look at Ethan's sleeping form on their couch, laptop still open on his chest like a shield. "Yes," she would say. Arthur would pause, the silence thick with everything he didn't say. Then, "If you ever need me—" "I won't," Lila would cut in softly. "Please, let me do this my way." Arthur didn't like not being needed, but he loved his daughter. And love, when you're powerful, means learning to watch without intervening. So he watched, from a distance, from the shadows that money creates. And he waited. The first investor meeting happened in a cafe that smelled like espresso and ambition. Ethan wore a blazer that didn't quite fit. Lila fixed his collar, smoothed his shoulder, then stepped back like she belonged in the background. "You're not coming?" Ethan asked. Lila nodded toward the table. "This is your moment." Ethan kissed her cheek. "I wouldn't be here without you." He meant it then, or maybe he meant the idea of it. The investor, a young man with a watch worth more than their car, listened with a face that didn't move. He asked sharp questions. He didn't smile. Ethan sweated through his shirt. Lila sat in a corner, hands folded, watching Ethan speak like his life depended on it. Because it did. At the end, the investor said, "Interesting. I'll have my associate send terms." Ethan walked out of the cafe like his bones had been replaced with lightning. He lifted Lila off the ground, laughing, spinning her once in the rain. "We did it!" he shouted. And Lila laughed too, rain catching in her hair, her heart swelling like it had room for the future. It felt like the beginning of a fairy tale, except fairy tales don't usually include cap tables. And in cap tables, there's always a price. Success didn't turn Ethan into a different person overnight. It was slower than that. It was a drip, a steady, invisible drip of validation, a string of compliments that began to sound like truth, a genius, a visionary, a self-made miracle. Ethan started dressing like the men he used to envy. He learned to smile for cameras with his eyes. He began speaking in we when he meant me. He stopped asking Lila what she thought. Not because he didn't care, because caring requires humility, and humility was becoming inconvenient. Veilbite grew. Small office to bigger office. More employees, bigger numbers. A glass-walled conference room where Ethan could stand at the head of the table and feel, for one shining moment, like he was untouchable. Lila, meanwhile, stayed the same. She brought lunch to the office sometimes, careful not to draw attention. She sat quietly in waiting areas. She never dropped names, never mentioned her father, her family, the Hartwell Group's holdings, the invisible web of influence that could have made Ethan's life easier. She thought silence protected them. Ethan interpreted it differently. Silence, to a man who craved applause, felt like absence. He started noticing other women, not in a hungry way at first, in a branding way. At networking events, he watched CEOs' wives, polished, photogenic, perfectly placed. He began to feel irrationally that Lila's quietness wasn't humility, it was inadequacy. Then Chloe Sterling arrived. She was hired as an executive assistant, though she called herself Strategic Operations, within a week. Chloe was young, sharp, and pretty in a way that photographs loved. She wore confidence like perfume, light but impossible to ignore. And she understood something Lila had never tried to understand. Ethan's deepest hunger wasn't money. It was the feeling of being chosen. Chloe fed that hunger with small, calculated gestures. She laughed at his jokes. She repeated his ideas back to him in meetings just louder. She made him feel like the smartest person in any room, even when he wasn't. And she did it with the ease of someone who had practiced on other men. One evening, after a long day of prepping for the IPO, Ethan rubbed his eyes and sighed. Chloe stepped closer, placing a printed folder on his desk like a gift. "You're going to crush it," she said. Ethan smiled tiredly. "You think?" Chloe looked at him like his success was inevitable. "I know." That "no" landed in Ethan's chest like a warm coin. At home, Lila asked, "How was your day?" Ethan shrugged. "Busy." Lila nodded, making him dinner, asking if he wanted tea. Chloe would have asked, "Did they finally realize you're the only reason this company exists?" And Ethan, without admitting it, preferred the version of himself that Chloe reflected. The first time Ethan said the word IPO out loud in front of Lila, he didn't sound excited. He sounded strategic. "They're doing due diligence," he said one night, scrolling through emails. "Everything is about optics now." "Optics?" Lila repeated. Ethan didn't look up. "Investors want stability, a story. They want clean." Lila stared at him, not understanding yet. The rain against the window seemed louder than before. "What are you saying?" she asked. Ethan exhaled. "I'm saying I can't have distractions." Lila's throat tightened. "Am I a distraction?" Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, but there was something else there too. Something hardened by rooms full of men who spoke in numbers. "You don't fit the narrative," he said. Lila felt like she'd been slapped, even though his voice was calm. "What narrative?" Ethan pushed back in his chair. "I'm becoming a public figure. This company, my life, will be scrutinized. People will dig into everything. They'll ask questions. He stopped, as if he'd hit the wall of a thought he didn't want to name. Lila whispered, "You want a different wife." Ethan didn't deny it fast enough. That was the moment something inside Lila, something delicate and protective, cracked. It wasn't rage. It was realization. She had loved a man who was building a ladder, and now he was deciding she was a rung he could step on and discard. The divorce didn't begin in court. It began in a conference room in Midtown, in Hartwell Tower. Though Ethan didn't know the building's name carried a dynasty. The room smelled like polished wood and expensive silence. Ethan arrived with a lawyer, Chloe beside him with a folder and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lila arrived alone, not because she had no one, because she didn't want anyone. She wore a simple coat, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what made her look like she'd slept. She sat across from Ethan and tried to recognize the man she'd married. Ethan didn't give her that kindness. He didn't look at her like a person. He looked at her like a clause he needed removed. "This doesn't have to be messy," Ethan said, leaning back. His voice was practiced. "We can keep it clean." Lila's hands were folded tightly in her lap. "You already decided," she said. Ethan smiled thinly. "I'm offering you a smooth exit." Chloe slid a document across the table. "We've prepared a settlement," she said brightly, as if announcing lunch. Lila didn't touch the paper. Her eyes flicked to the far corner of the room. There was a man sitting there, older, silver hair, hands resting on a cane, though he didn't lean on it like weakness, more like it was a symbol, a presence, a statement. He hadn't spoken. No one introduced him. He simply watched. Ethan didn't notice him at first. Ethan rarely noticed people who didn't directly serve his ego. Lila swallowed. "Who is that?" Chloe's smile didn't change. "Building owner's representative," she said smoothly. "We needed a neutral witness for the room reservation." Neutral. Lila's gaze stayed on the man. Arthur Hartwell's eyes met hers, calm, steady, almost painfully gentle. A question lived there. "Is this what you wanted?" Lila barely nodded. Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. He honored her silence. Ethan began talking again. Legal words, clean words, words that sounded like they were meant to leave no blood. Then he reached into his pocket, and that's when he performed the moment he would later regret more than losing the company. He pulled out a sleek black credit card. He tossed it across the polished table like a bone to a dog. It skidded, spinning once, and hit Lila's hand. A soft plastic tap. Lila flinched. Ethan shrugged like it was nothing. 10,000. Consider it goodwill." Lila stared at the card. Her fingers didn't move. Ethan's mouth curled. "Don't act shocked. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" Lila repeated, voice barely audible. Ethan leaned forward, eyes cold now. "You've been, let's be honest, dead weight. I carried us. I built everything. You were just there." Chloe gave a sympathetic little sigh, as if she pitied Lila's inability to accept reality. Ethan continued, sharper. "And I'm tired of dragging excess baggage while I'm trying to fly." Excess baggage. Lila's face went still. Not blank, still, like a lake freezing over. And in that stillness, Arthur Hartwell's hand tightened around his cane. Ethan didn't see it. He didn't see the way the man's eyes darkened. He didn't see the warning that money has when it's deciding whether to forgive. Lila finally slid the card back across the table with 2 fingers, like it was something dirty. "I don't want it," she said. Ethan laughed once, incredulous. "Don't be dramatic. Take it. It's more than you deserve." Something in Lila rose, quiet, controlled. "It's not about what I deserve," she said. "It's about what you think you are." Ethan's smile vanished. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lila looked at him, really looked. "You think you're self-made," she said softly. "That's the saddest part." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I am self-made." Lila didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't expose the money she'd quietly poured into his dream, because she wasn't ready to let go of the last thing she had, the belief that her love had meant something to him. She stood. "Sign whatever you want," she said. "I won't fight you." Chloe's eyebrows rose, pleased. Ethan smirked. "Smart choice." Lila turned to leave. As she passed the corner, Arthur Hartwell's voice finally touched the air, low, controlled. Lila. Just her name. No last name, no title. A father's whisper. Lila paused, but she didn't look back. Because if she looked back, she might crumble. And she couldn't afford to crumble in front of Ethan. Not anymore. She walked out of the conference room with her shoulders straight. Behind her, Ethan signed papers like he was signing his own victory. And Arthur Hartwell, silent, still, watched the door close. He didn't move. Not yet. But something had shifted, like a storm deciding where to land. The days after the divorce announcement moved fast. Ethan's world did what it always did. It rewarded him for acting like nothing hurt. He posted a carefully worded statement about amicable separation and focusing on the future. He took meetings, He smiled in photos. He went to events. Chloe became a constant presence. In pictures, she stood just close enough to look important. People started whispering their assumptions. Poor Lila. She must have been boring. He upgraded. At Veilbite, employees pretended not to gossip, but the air hummed with it anyway. The IPO process accelerated. Bankers wanted confidence. They wanted charisma. They wanted a story. Ethan gave them one. He would stand in sleek conference rooms and speak about innovation, disruption, the next chapter. He made jokes about being married to the company now. Men laughed. Women smiled. Money leaned in. In the background, Lila moved through her new, quiet life like a ghost. She rented a small place, minimal furniture, no photos. She stopped answering unknown calls. She walked through the city at night, letting the noise cover her thoughts. She didn't cry much, not because she didn't feel, because she was trying not to. Her wound wasn't only Ethan's betrayal. It was her own decision to be small, to be silent, to believe that if she hid her power, she could guarantee love was real. Now, alone in a room with too much quiet, she had to face an ugly question. If he loved me, would he have treated me like luggage? The answer sat heavy, and it changed the way she breathed. The invitation, that was a challenge. The engagement party invitation arrived like a slap dressed in velvet. A thick envelope, cream paper, raised gold lettering. Ethan Vale and Chloe Sterling invite you to celebrate their engagement at the Hartwell Crown Hotel, Midtown Manhattan. There was a line at the bottom. Your presence would be appreciated. It wasn't sincere, it was theater. Ethan wanted to prove something, to investors, to the world, to himself. That he had moved on, that he had leveled up, that Lila was a footnote. Chloe had likely insisted on it, a little humiliation wrapped in etiquette. Lila stared at the invitation for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. She scrolled until she found a number with no name. She pressed call. It rang once. Arthur answered as if he'd been waiting. Lila. Her voice came out steady. He invited me. Arthur's silence was immediate, dangerous. Do you want to go? He asked. Lila exhaled. I don't know. Arthur's voice softened, just slightly. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove, Lila said. Then, quieter, I'm trying to stop hiding. Arthur understood that, because hiding was how she had survived wealth without becoming it. But hiding had also cost her. Come to the apartment, Arthur said. We'll talk. Lila swallowed. I haven't been there in years. I know, Arthur replied. That's why. Arthur Hartwell's private residence wasn't a home in the way Lila had tried to define home. It was a place designed to make people remember their position. The elevator opened silently. The hallway carpet swallowed footsteps. The air smelled faintly of polished leather and something floral, expensive, restrained. Lila walked behind Arthur as if following a man she knew and didn't know. In the living room, windows framed the city like art. Arthur poured tea the way you might sign a contract, carefully, without spilling. He didn't ask why she'd hidden. He didn't lecture. He simply said, he threw money at you. Lila's fingers tightened around the teacup. Yes. Arthur's eyes narrowed. How much? 10,000, Lila answered. Arthur's jaw flexed, not because of the amount, because of the meaning. Arthur Hartwell didn't measure insult in dollars. He measured it in audacity. He called you, Arthur began, then paused. Lila lowered her gaze. Dead weight. The words sounded worse out loud. Arthur's hand rested on the table, steady. For a moment, Lila saw what Ethan never had, the difference between loud power and quiet power. Ethan performed. Arthur simply existed, and rooms reshaped themselves around him. Arthur took a breath. What do you want, Lila? Lila stared at the city lights. I want to be done letting people misunderstand me. Arthur nodded once. Then you'll go. Lila looked at him. And do what? Humiliate him? Arthur's eyes met hers. No. He leaned forward slightly, voice low. You won't humiliate him, he said. He already did that to himself. Lila's throat tightened. Then why go? Arthur's answer was simple. Because your silence has been his shield. Lila felt the truth like a hand on her spine. Arthur continued, controlled. You don't need revenge. You need presence. You need to let reality exist in the same room as his arrogance. Lila whispered, He'll hate me. Arthur's expression didn't soften. He should hate himself, he said. Then, after a beat, gentler, and if he hates you for refusing to be small, that's not love. That's entitlement. Lila's eyes burned. She blinked it back. Arthur stood. We'll prepare. Lila hesitated. Prepare how? Arthur's gaze moved to the window, to the city he'd bought pieces of over decades. We'll do what we always do, he said. We'll tell the truth. On the night of the engagement party, Midtown glittered like it had been polished for cameras. Outside the Hartwell Crown, cars lined up, glossy and black. Valets in crisp uniforms opened doors for people who spoke in investment terms. Inside, the ballroom was a cathedral of wealth. White flowers spilling like clouds, champagne towers, a string quartet playing something soft and expensive. Ethan stood at the center of it all like a man finally breathing his own myth. Chloe clung to his arm, her ring catching light. She wore a dress that demanded attention. She leaned in, whispering, Look at them, Ethan. They're watching you. Ethan smiled. Good. Chloe's eyes scanned the room, calculating. The Northbridge people are here, and 3 from the Exchange Advisory Group. Ethan nodded, pleased. Perfect. Chloe squeezed his arm. This is it. This is our moment. Our. Ethan liked that word when it meant his future. He didn't notice how Chloe's our never included sacrifice, never included loyalty, never included him if he couldn't provide. Across the room, a few investors laughed loudly at Ethan's jokes. Cameras flashed. Someone mentioned valuations. Ethan's heart swelled. Then a hush rolled through the room in a way Ethan didn't understand at first. Not a sudden silence, more like a tension shifting, like a spotlight turning. Ethan followed the gaze of a banker. He saw the doors. They had opened. And there she was, Lila. Lila didn't make an entrance the way Chloe did. She didn't wave. She didn't smile too wide. She walked in as if she belonged to the air. Her dress was dark, deep midnight blue, and it moved like water. The diamonds at her throat were not loud. They were precise, brutal in their understatement. A few people whispered her name, uncertain. Most didn't know it. They only felt the shift. Ethan's chest tightened. For one absurd second, he thought, she's here to beg. Then he saw her face. It wasn't begging. It was finality. Chloe's smile stiffened. She actually came. Ethan's voice came out too sharp. Of course she did. Chloe's gaze flicked over Lila's jewelry. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together. Jealousy is loudest when it's trying to sound polite. She's dressed up, Chloe murmured for a laugh. Cute! Ethan tried to laugh too. It sounded wrong. Lila crossed the ballroom without rushing. People moved aside without realizing they were doing it. And then, like the last note before a song changes key, the elevator chime sounded. Ding! Heads turned. A man stepped out. Silver hair, tailored suit. A cane in his hand that looked less like support and more like a signature. Arthur Hartwell. He didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. The room recognized him in a way people recognize gravity. Whispers spread with speed. Hartwell. Arthur Hartwell? The Hartwell Group? Ethan's mouth went dry. He had heard the name, of course. Anyone in New York finance had. Hartwell Group was old money dressed as modern infrastructure. Real estate, hotels, holdings that didn't trend on social media because they didn't have to. Ethan felt the room's attention slide away from him and toward the man. Chloe's nails dug into Ethan's arm. Ethan, she whispered, why is Arthur Hartwell here? Ethan swallowed. I don't know. Arthur stopped beside Lila. He didn't touch her, but the way he stood near her said protected. Then Arthur turned toward the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The microphone was offered. He accepted it as if he were accepting something that already belonged to him. He looked at the room like he was counting debts. "Good evening," Arthur said. "Thank you for coming." A polite murmur returned. Arthur paused, just long enough for silence to become uncomfortable. Then he said, "Before we celebrate this engagement, there is something you should know." Ethan forced a smile. "Mr. Hartwell, this is a private event." Arthur's eyes flicked toward Ethan. Not angry, worse, amused. "You're hosting in my hotel," Arthur said calmly. Ethan's smile faltered. Arthur continued, voice smooth. "And I'm here for my daughter." The word daughter struck the room like lightning. Ethan turned slowly, as if his body was reluctant to follow what his mind was refusing. Lila's face remained composed, but her eyes, steady, dark, held Ethan like a verdict. Chloe's mouth opened. "What?" Arthur's voice didn't change. "Lila Hartwell," he said. He used the last name like a crown being placed. "She is my child, my only heir." The room erupted in whispers. Phones lifted subtly, recording. Ethan felt heat rush to his face, then drain away. He managed, That's not." Arthur lifted a hand, gently silencing him without touching him. 2 years, Arthur said, glancing at Ethan. "You were married to her." Ethan swallowed. "Lila never told me." "No," Arthur agreed. "She didn't." There was no accusation in that statement, only consequence. Arthur turned back to the investors, the bankers, the advisors. "I understand you are here because you believe in Veilbite Technologies," he said. Ethan's spine straightened instinctively. "Yes, Veilbite is—" Arthur's gaze cut him off again. "I'm sure it has promise," Arthur said, "but promise and integrity are not the same." The room held its breath. Arthur gestured to the ballroom, to the chandeliers, the flowers, the champagne. "This property," he said, "is owned by the Hartwell Group." A whisper. "Of course." Arthur continued, "As is the Hartwell Crown brand." He paused. "And as of this evening, it should be clear to you, the person you called your ex is the owner of the hotel you're standing in." Ethan felt like the floor beneath him had been replaced with glass. Chloe's fingers loosened on his arm, the first instinctive step away from sinking. Arthur's voice remained calm, but the calm carried teeth. "I also understand Northbridge Capital Bank is here," Arthur said, eyes sliding toward a cluster of suited faces. One man stiffened. Arthur nodded as if greeting him. "Northbridge holds the primary revolving credit line for Veilbite," Arthur said. Ethan's heart began to race. Arthur continued. "Lila sits on the oversight committee for Hartwell's financial holdings, holdings which include a significant controlling interest in Northbridge's parent structure." He didn't say, "We own the bank." He said something more terrifying. "We have influence where it matters." Ethan opened his mouth. "That's irrelevant." Arthur's eyes sharpened slightly. "It would be irrelevant," he said, "if Veilbite's compliance records were clean." A shift. A ripple. CFOs and lawyers exchanged looks. Chloe's face whitened. "What is he—" Arthur lifted a thin folder. The paper looked ordinary, which made it even worse. "In the past months," Arthur said, "company funds have been used for personal expenses." He didn't dramatize it. He didn't have to. "Luxury travel not tied to business purposes," he continued. "Personal dining charges. And tonight's event, billed in part as investor relations, while being publicly marketed as an engagement celebration." Ethan's skin went cold. The CFO of Veilbite, standing near the bar, looked like someone had punched him. Arthur let the room absorb that. Then he said the line that turned champagne into acid. "Northbridge has compliance triggers, covenants. They exist for moments like this." Ethan tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. Arthur's voice softened, almost kindly. "You wanted to go public," Arthur said. "Public companies cannot afford private dishonesty." Ethan's vision narrowed. He heard the rain from years ago, imagined tapping at the window of their tiny apartment. He remembered Lila's hand over his. He remembered saying, "I wouldn't be here without you." And now he realized the shape of that truth. Because the truth wasn't flattering. The truth was expensive. Arthur looked at Lila, then back to the crowd. "My daughter will not be dragged into a scandal," he said. He didn't say, "She will punish you." He said something more absolute. "She will be protected." Arthur turned to Ethan directly. "Ethan Vale," he said, voice low enough only the closest could hear. "2 years ago, you threw money at my daughter like she was disposable." Ethan's throat tightened. "I didn't know." Arthur's eyes hardened for the first time. "You didn't ask," Arthur said. That was the knife. Not the money, not the hotel, not the bank. The fact that Ethan had never been curious about the woman who loved him. Ethan's voice cracked. "Lila, you..." Lila stepped forward. Not dramatic, just present. Her voice was calm. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to be loved," she said. "Not leveraged." Ethan's eyes burned. "I did love you." Lila's gaze didn't waver. "Then you wouldn't have called me dead weight," she said. The room felt suddenly too bright. Chloe's hand slid off Ethan's arm. Ethan noticed. Not because he was watching her, because absence is loud when you're falling. Chloe adjusted her posture, smiling nervously. "This is clearly a misunderstanding." Arthur didn't look at her. "You are free to leave," he said. Chloe blinked. "Excuse me?" Arthur finally glanced at her. His eyes were polite, empty. "People who attach themselves to power," he said, "usually know when it changes hands." Chloe's face flushed. She turned to Ethan, her expression tightening into something that tried to look sympathetic. "I can't," she whispered, barely audible. "Ethan, I can't be part of this." Ethan stared at her. "Chloe!" She stepped back, then another step, like someone reversing away from a fire. And just like that, the ring in her hand looked cheap. A photographer captured the moment. Flash! Ethan flinched. Arthur's voice cut through the murmurs again. "For those with financial involvement in Veilbite," he said, "you will receive formal communication by morning." He didn't say what would happen. He didn't need to. The room understood. Capital is a herd animal. It runs when it smells smoke. A banker whispered into a phone. A lawyer's face turned rigid. An investor's smile disappeared. Ethan's chest tightened as if an invisible tie had been pulled. He tried to breathe. He tried to speak. He tried to reclaim the stage. But the stage had been built on a floor he didn't own. The first domino fell quietly. A man from Northbridge leaned toward another and spoke in a low voice. The second domino fell louder. One of Ethan's early investors, an older woman with sharp eyes, approached Ethan, expression controlled. "Ethan," she said, "we need to talk." Ethan forced a smile. "Of course, let's..." She didn't smile back. "Not here." The third domino came from his own team. His CFO, face pale, stepped in close, voice urgent. "Ethan," he hissed, "what did you do?" Ethan snapped, too loud. "I didn't do anything." Heads turned. Ethan heard his own voice echo in the ballroom and realized he sounded like a man losing a grip. His lawyer, present as a guest, expression suddenly professional, moved toward him. "We should leave," the lawyer murmured. Ethan's eyes searched for Chloe. She was already halfway across the room, walking fast, her heels clicking like punctuation. "Chloe!" Ethan called. She didn't turn. Ethan's heart sank in a way he didn't know was possible. He pushed through people, ignoring stares, and caught her near the exit. Chloe finally turned, eyes glossy with something that might have been fear. "Don't," she whispered. Ethan's voice broke. "You're leaving?" Chloe's face tightened. "Ethan, this is not what you told me." Ethan's laugh came out wrong. "What did you think would happen? That you'd marry me and..." Chloe's eyes flicked toward the ballroom, toward Arthur, toward Lila. "I thought you were winning," she said, brutally honest. Ethan froze. Chloe pressed her lips together, softer but not kinder. "I can't be in a scandal. I have a career." Ethan stared at her, disbelieving. I am your career. Chloe's gaze hardened. You were? Then she pulled her hand away, slipped the ring off, placed it in Ethan's palm like returning an item with a receipt, and she left. Ethan stood there, the ring cold against his skin. It felt heavier than any diamond should. He turned back to the ballroom, desperate for something stable. Lila stood beside Arthur, calm, not smug, not triumphant, just done. Ethan pushed toward her. People moved away like they didn't want to be touched by his fall. He reached Lila, breath ragged. Lila, he whispered, please. Lila looked at him, and Ethan, for the first time in months, saw what he had refused to see. The cost of her quiet, the tiredness behind her eyes, the way she had once made herself small to make him feel big. His throat tightened. I didn't know, he said, voice trembling. If I had known... Lila's eyes sharpened slightly. That's the problem, she said. You think the only thing worth respecting is power. Ethan shook his head. No, Lila continued, voice steady, low. When you threw that card at me, she said, you weren't insulting my bank account, you were insulting my humanity. Ethan swallowed, face burning. I was angry, I was stressed. The IPO... The IPO, Lila repeated, almost a whisper. She took a breath. Then she said the sentence that cut deeper than Arthur's financial facts. I funded your beginning, she said. Ethan froze. His eyes widened. What? Lila's voice didn't rise. I didn't do it so you'd owe me, she said. I did it because I believed in you. Ethan's mind raced, trying to reject it. You paid... Lila nodded slightly. More than once. Ethan's stomach dropped. All those rebates, the lucky checks, the times rent was suddenly covered. He saw it now, the invisible hands holding him up. And he remembered calling her dead weight. He swayed slightly. Arthur stepped forward, cane tapping once on the floor, quiet, final. You used company funds for personal vanity, Arthur said, not loud but absolute. You broke trust. You broke covenant. You broke your own story. Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't mean... Arthur's eyes held him. Intent does not erase impact, he said. Ethan looked around. Investors avoided his gaze. Employees watched from corners, faces tight. The ballroom that had been his stage was now his courtroom, and the verdict was written on every averted eye. The next morning, the world Ethan had built began to evaporate, not slowly, with efficiency. Northbridge initiated a compliance review. The advisory group suspended the IPO timeline pending investigation. A major partner paused negotiations to reassess risk. News outlets didn't say fraud in the first headline. They said questions. In finance, questions is a polite way of saying blood in the water. Ethan sat in his office, staring at his screen as emails poured in like rain. Subject lines that used to promise opportunity now carried distance. Urgent. Board meeting, immediate action required. Expense reporting. His lawyer called. Do not speak publicly, his CFO called. We're in breach. His PR team texted, Are you okay? Chloe didn't call. Ethan's phone stayed silent except for consequences. And in the middle of it all, a memory kept replaying. The soft tap of the credit card against Lila's hand. The way she didn't pick it up. The way she looked at him like she was watching him become someone she couldn't save. 2 days later, the board meeting happened without sympathy. A long table, cold faces, legal language. Ethan argued. He blamed stress. He blamed miscommunication. But the numbers were the numbers, and trust, once broken, doesn't wait for explanations. When the vote came, Ethan felt the world tilt again. He watched hands lift, one by one. He was removed as CEO, not because he wasn't brilliant, because brilliance doesn't excuse recklessness, and power, real power, protects itself. Ethan walked out of his own building carrying a cardboard box like a cliché. Inside, a framed photo he'd forgotten was on his desk, a Veilbite hoodie, a cheap pen. Outside, the city didn't pause for him. The rain began again, light and persistent, like the city tapping the window, asking, "Are you still in there?" Weeks blurred. Ethan tried to salvage his reputation. He offered statements. He apologized publicly in polished paragraphs. People accepted the apology the way you accept an umbrella in a storm. Briefly, then toss it aside when you're dry. He tried to find work in tech. Doors closed politely. He tried to start something new. Investors ignored him. He tried to pretend he wasn't broke, but the bank didn't care about pride. He sold his watch, then his car. Then the apartment lease ended and he realized his life in New York had been rented too. One night, alone in a nearly empty room, Ethan opened a drawer and found something he'd shoved there months ago. The sleek black credit card. The one he'd thrown at Lila. It was still there because she never took it, because she had refused to accept his version of value. Ethan stared at it, and for the first time he felt the full weight of what he had done. Not just that he'd lost, but that he had been wrong about who deserved respect. He thought of Lila, quiet, steady. He thought of her hands making tea. He thought of the way she used to watch him as if he mattered even when no one else did. His throat tightened. He whispered into the empty room, "I'm sorry." The word didn't change anything, but it was the first honest thing he'd said in a long time. Ohio didn't look like punishment. It looked like breathing. Redwood Falls was small, the kind of town where people nodded at each other in grocery store aisles, where the diner waitress remembered your coffee order after 2 visits. Ethan ended up there not because he had a plan, because he had nowhere else to be. He found work at a used car lot on the edge of town. Rows of cars under open sky, wind moving through flags that advertised low down payment. The owner, a blunt man named Rick, had looked at Ethan's resume and laughed. "Tech CEO," Rick said. Ethan nodded, throat tight. Rick squinted. "You know anything about cars?" Ethan shook his head. Rick snorted. "You know how to talk to people without acting like you're better than them?" Ethan hesitated. Then he said the truth. "I'm learning." Rick stared a moment, then jerked his head toward the lot. "Fine, don't mess up my paperwork." Ethan didn't. He learned to show up on time. He learned to listen. He learned to smile without performing. He learned that people didn't care what he used to be. They cared if he treated them with dignity. There was a woman who came in with her teenage son, nervous about buying his first car. Ethan could have upsold them, could have used the old persuasive tricks. Instead, he showed them the safest option in their budget, explained the maintenance costs, warned them about what not to buy. The woman looked at him like she didn't expect honesty. "Why would you tell us that?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "Because it's true." She bought the car. She brought him cookies a week later. Ethan stood behind the counter holding a tin of homemade chocolate chip cookies and felt something unfamiliar. Not pride. Peace. Ethan kept a notebook in his small apartment. Not a dream journal, a ledger. He wrote down every expense, every paycheck, every dollar he could spare. And at the top of the first page he wrote, $10,000. He didn't do it because he thought money would fix what he broke. He did it because he needed to face the symbol. He needed to undo, in the only language he'd used to insult her, the insult itself. It took 2 years. 2 years of saying no to small luxuries. 2 years of living simply. 2 years of waking up early, working honest days, going home tired in a way that felt clean. When the number finally reached 10,000, Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he went to the bank. He asked for a cashier's check. The teller slid it across the counter. Ethan's fingers trembled as he took it. Outside, the wind was cold. He held the envelope against his chest like it mattered. Because it did. At home, he wrote a letter by hand. Not an email, not a statement, a letter. His handwriting was slightly shaky at first, then steadied. "Lila, 2 years ago I threw money at you like it could replace respect. I called you names that said more about my own emptiness than about your worth. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if you'll read this. But I saved this because I needed to give back the thing I used to hurt you. You taught me a lesson I paid for with everything. I deserved it. I hope you're happy. Ethan. He stared at the words until his eyes blurred. Then he sealed the envelope, addressed it to Hartwell Group headquarters in New York, and mailed it. When the envelope left his hands, he felt lighter. Not free, but honest. In New York, Lila Hartwell's days were filled with meetings that began on time and ended with decisions. She had stepped into her inheritance not like a princess claiming a throne, but like a woman who finally stopped apologizing for the space she occupied. Arthur Hartwell had started transitioning responsibilities slowly, carefully. Not because he doubted her, because he wanted her to learn the machine before she turned its gears. Lila learned quickly. She learned how people smiled differently when they wanted something, how men who used to ignore her now called her Ms. Hartwell with too much warmth, how power was less about shouting and more about simply having the option to say no. She didn't become cruel, she became clear. There were nights she still thought about Ethan, not with longing, with a quiet ache, like pressing a finger against a bruise that no longer controls you, but still exists. Arthur never asked her to hate him. He only asked once, "Are you okay?" Lila had answered honestly. "I'm learning what I deserve," she said, and she meant it. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, a plain white envelope among sleek corporate mail. An assistant placed it on Lila's desk with other documents. Lila almost ignored it. Then she saw the handwriting. Ethan's. Her throat tightened in a way she didn't expect. She waited until the office was quiet, until the glass walls felt less like observation and more like protection. Then she opened it. The letter slid out. The cashier's check beneath it looked heavy, official, final. $10,000. The exact number. Lila read the letter once, then again. She didn't cry, but her eyes stung. Not from sadness, from something else. Recognition. Change. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. 2 years ago, Ethan had thrown money at her to prove she was nothing. Now he had worked for 2 years to return it, to prove, perhaps to himself, that he could be different. Lila's fingers traced the edge of the check. Arthur's voice echoed faintly in her mind. Your silence has been his shield. But this wasn't silence. This was effort. Lila stood and walked to the window. The city moved below like a river of ambition. She thought of Ethan in Ohio, selling used cars, counting dollars, learning humility the hard way. She thought of Chloe, gone like smoke. She thought of the ballroom where Ethan had fallen. Then she made a decision, not out of revenge, not out of pity, out of closure. Lila called her assistant. Schedule a transfer, she said gently. To where? The assistant asked. Lila looked down at the check, then at Ethan's letter. A scholarship fund, Lila said, for students who can't afford to start. The assistant blinked. In whose name? Lila paused. She could have named it after Hartwell, after her mother, after herself. Instead, she said, name it after possibility. The assistant nodded slowly, understanding it wasn't a business move, it was a personal one. When she hung up, Lila returned to her desk. She picked up Ethan's letter one last time. She didn't write back, not because she didn't care, because some chapters don't need a sequel. They need an ending. She placed the letter in a folder marked closed. Then she smiled. Not the kind of smile you give when you win, the kind you give when you finally stop carrying something heavy. Outside, rain began tapping against the glass. Soft, steady. Not a storm, just the city checking in. And this time, Lila's answer was simple. She was still in there. Whole. Ending thought. The lesson that outlives the party. Ethan once believed success made him untouchable. He believed money was proof of worth. He believed people were either useful or disposable. But life has a strange way of correcting that kind of arrogance. Sometimes it uses courts. Sometimes it uses headlines. Sometimes it uses a quiet woman walking into a ballroom and letting the truth stand beside her. And sometimes, when the dust settles, it leaves you in a small town with nothing but your own reflection, asking you to become someone worth living with. Because the people you dismiss today, the ones you call baggage, the ones you underestimate because they don't advertise their power, might be the ones holding your future in their hands tomorrow. Not to destroy you, but to show you who you really are. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever had to rebuild after pride broke something precious, leave a comment with the word, "Still here," because no matter where you are in your own chapter, you're not alone.